Welcome to TNT, baby, the naked truth with Taylor Armstrong, where I'm going to expose everything about my life, and my guests are going to come on, get naked with me, and bear it all. Now let's get naked.
You may know Taylor from Real Housewives of Beverly Hills, Real Housewives Ultimate Girls Trip, and the first of its kind crossover to Real Housewives of Orange County. She's the author of Hiding from Reality, host of The Naked Truth, and gives back through empowered experts. Taylor is also a survivor. Taylor, welcome to Turtzed.
I'm so happy to be here.
I will admit I went back and I watched some episodes, and I wanted to just say that you introduced yourself to the world at one of the most difficult times I could imagine someone could go through. And you did it with such grace and such vulnerability. And I don't know where you found the strength to go through all that in front of a national stage. And I am excited to have a conversation with you today to learn where that strength comes from.
I'm really happy that you're allowing me to talk about my journey, because anytime we talk about it, it has an impact on other people. And your journey and my journey is encouraging people that there is life after, and that there's a whole nother life waiting for you on the other side of tragedy.
Absolutely. And I think with tragedy, there's so many different aspects that we could dive into. When I talk about my journey, I start from the beginning. Are you comfortable talking about your experience as a child?
Of course.
One of the things I thought that was really interesting to me was that there were little breadcrumbs all throughout the first season of Beverly Hills. And one of the things that you had said was you hadn't slept since 1976. And I noticed that aligned to when you were 5 years old. Can you tell us what happened when you were 5?
So my earliest childhood memory, I believe I was around 3. I can remember exactly what I was wearing. I was wearing blue zip-up footed pajamas with a red teddy bear, and it was my father beating my mother. She and I were laying in her bed together, and he had come home, and he was extremely violent, and he was beating my mom, and I pulled myself up, and I was pulling my dad's hair as he was hitting my mom. And she was young. She was in her very early 20s, and she had the courage to grab a hold of me, and we ran out a sliding glass door, and she never looked back. And finding that courage at such a young age to recognize that it was more important for her to get to safety for she and I than to have the relationship that she was in that was so toxic, I just applaud her immensely, because I wasn't able to leave that early on.
When you think back to that memory, one, thank you for sharing. And I wonder, when you think back to that, how did you interpret that as a child?
I'm not sure that I was able to interpret it then, because I was so young. What I do know is that it had a substantial effect on my self-esteem as I was growing up in junior high, elementary, high school, feeling like I always needed validation from boys, because I had a father that wasn't present in my life. And I don't know that I was actually cognizant of it at the time, but just feeling like if this person who brought me into the world that's supposed to love me more than anyone can't love me and can't be here for me, then I need someone else to fill that void. And so I made decisions to have sex earlier than I really wanted to, just because I needed that constant validation and that I was good enough and worth it from boys. And I had very long-term relationships at a young age, like a few years, starting in 6th grade. And I felt like that's the person I'm going to marry. This is my forever person, and always attaching myself for the long haul, thinking that I just need to replace this person that doesn't love me enough to be around.
When you think back to those relationships, they were very long. How do you feel about those relationships now, in terms of, were they just there? Were they exciting? What did those relationships feel like?
Well, when I do public speaking, I talk about Todd Walton. He was like dreamy. So, for a sixth grade girl, he was just like a dreamboat. He was so handsome and athletic. And we had this very intense relationship. It wasn't sexual, but just, it was like we were so connected. It was very, I don't want to say codependent, but from a sixth grader perspective, probably codependent. And then we were just always together. And then he moved away. And I remember walking around my neighborhood in navy blue polo socks, because that was the thing, right, back in the 80s, and just walking in circles until I completely wore my socks out, thinking like the love of my life is gone forever. This was my husband. This was my future, because I was so over-invested in these relationships I feel like just trying to fill a void or lack of self-esteem.
When he moved away, obviously that initial experience of walking around until your socks literally had holes in them, what did that feel like as you processed him leaving?
I'm never going to find anyone else. I'm never going to have another Todd Walton. And it makes me sad to remember what that felt like, because I would never want to see a young girl feel that way, that you need someone else to fill that void or to take care of you from a self-esteem perspective. I just want young women, of course, with Empowered Experts and everything that we do, to be so strong that they know they don't need anyone else, and that they're making choices to bring people into their lives because they enjoy that person, and that they're an asset as a friend or a companion versus filling a need. It's a scary feeling.
Yeah. And as you said, was almost a transference of the relationship that you would have wanted with a father figure to another male in your life, of codependency and spending all this time together. As you look back, was there ever a conversation with your mom prior to or post you guys leaving about the strength that it took for her to go and what that meant? Or did you guys not really talk about it?
We've talked about it now that I've gone through my journey a little bit, but no, my mom, bless her heart, she had to work all the time to take care of me, and my father not being present in my life in any way, including support. My mom and I grew up together.
Yeah.
She was 21 when she had me, and so it was just, she was just grinding all the time to try to make sure that I had the right clothes and could fit in and felt self-confident. And I know she did everything she could, and she didn't date. She spent all of her time just making sure that we were good.
I have so much respect for her being able to do that at such a young age and just saying, literally grabbing you and going.
Yeah.
It's so powerful for you to be able to share your journey as well. And I would imagine having that conversation with your mom isn't always easy. How did you open the door to that conversation with her all these years later?
So when I wrote my book, I wrote my life story, Hiding from Reality, which I was hiding my abuse and everything I was going through in my marriage from the cameras. But at the same time, my mom didn't really know what was going on, because of course I didn't want her to know. Of course, I'm an only child. She's very sensitive, and it would have hurt her so badly. I think a lot of the conversations came out of when she finally read my book and recognizing that she didn't know what I was experiencing over the years. And I know that she in some ways has some form of guilt about it, which she shouldn't have in any way, shape, or form, that she didn't know, because I was doing a really good job, I felt like, of hiding it. Yeah. But in writing the book, I talked about how I just really respected that she had the strength to do that. And I remember when I woke up, I had reconstructive surgery on my face, and I woke up in the recovery room, and I was just kind of coming out of morphine, and my mom and my best friend were sitting there, and I just looked at my mom and thought, I have to leave. Like, I can't continue to do this to her and to my best friend.
Yeah.
And then they wheeled me downstairs because my daughter was too young to come up, and she was sitting on my lap in the wheelchair, and I thought, if I don't have the strength to do this for me, I have to do this for them.
I can't imagine what that would feel like to be in the hospital with your daughter. And I am truly thankful that in that moment that you were able to do it because of your daughter. And for the same reason your mom said, I can't do this and left through that glass door, you were sitting there doing the same thing. And we all go on different journeys. And for me, I can relate so much to what you just said about the conversation with your mom, because when I released the first couple of episodes of my podcast, there were things that she didn't know. There were things my brother didn't know. And I've had a lot of conversations with her about the same thing of, you couldn't have known because I wouldn't have told you the truth anyway.
Right.
And I didn't understand it, and I was depressed, and we've had conversations about the guilt both ways of me not telling her and her not knowing. But one of the things that was so difficult for me was I had a period where I was afraid for my life, and I thought I was hiding it really, really well and that no one would know. And after the episode came out where I talked about it, my mom and I had a conversation, and I was terrified to ask her why she let me go back to school, because I had come home to talk to my uncle, just as my uncle. And she said, because I knew that I had to trust my brother in order to let you go back to school, because if I said anything, I was afraid that I would be the reason why. And it's so hard to be in that situation as both, I would imagine, for a parent, but also as a child, trying to hide all of that. As you were growing up, were there other things that you were hiding from your mom that you think impacted you later in life?
I feel like because my mom was working so much, we didn't really get a chance to spend a lot of time just talking about things. And it was sort of an unspoken situation that we went through together. I don't know if that's generational, because people are so much more open now, and everybody is willing to talk about their feelings, I feel, more than they were. And by not bringing it up in some strange way, I feel as though I was protecting my mom so she didn't have to relive it. Even though it wasn't helping me to heal, I didn't want her to have to go through it and talk about it, which makes no sense now that I'm an adult, because of course I would want my child to speak to me about their emotions. Yeah. But I always felt like I was protecting my mom by just muscling through it, so to speak, emotionally.
As you left your adolescence and went into adulthood, you were a cheerleader. You're putting on a happy face and a persona and going out and starting to build a life for yourself and wanting to build a life that was outside of where you grew up. What was that journey like for you as you went to college and graduated?
It was freeing. I'm super excited. My daughter's going to college in just a few days, and I'm so excited for the next chapter of her life. Of course, I'm going to be bawling as I drive away, but I'm just excited for her to go out and experience this next chapter of her life. She has a ton of really good friends, and watching them all disband is going to be a little emotional, but I feel like when I went away to college, it was my turn, and I didn't feel like I needed to take care of my mom, and it was a new beginning for me, just to be like, I'm on my own, and now I get to make my own choices. I would say that one of the most bizarre things that happened concerning my father is when I went to a large high school in Oklahoma, and when I was graduating, I hadn't seen him in forever, and I came up the escalator. We're in like a huge auditorium, and he was standing there after all those years, and he said he wanted to have lunch with me the next day, which I was in shock to see him to begin with, and he gave me $100, and I never spoke to him again. He never called or anything.
What, when he showed up and then you didn't see him again, Did that trigger anything in you?
It absolutely. It triggered me in ways because he knew exactly where to find me. Even then, I mean, I graduated in '89, and it wasn't as though there was like Facebook and all of these things happening, but he took the time to seek me out and show his presence and then disappear again. And when I signed on to do Real Housewives of Beverly Hills, I thought, I wonder if he's going to come out of the woodwork. Plus, clearly you can find me. I'm on Facebook, Instagram,
Yeah.
Twitter. Back then it was all Twitter when we first started Beverly Hills, and it's not that difficult to find someone, right? The tabloids, I was all over the tabloids. It was back when they actually cared about housewives. Now there's 950 of us, so they don't even bother with the tabloids anymore. They're just like, who cares? Let's talk about politics. But no, back then we were all over the tabloids,
Yeah.
and he didn't come to find me or even try to reach out through a publicist or anything. And at first I was scared he was going to try to find me because I thought it would be too painful. And then when he didn't, I actually felt worse because I thought he knows where to find me, but he's never tried.
Well, there's that deep childhood wound of wanting him to show up, wanting him to be there for you, knowing that he has full capabilities because you're on a national platform, and then not showing up. I can relate so much to feeling like I just wasn't worth showing up for. And that was difficult for me. And
I agree. But I do think I've talked to therapist, Dr. Charlie Sophie, who's been so amazing in my life about it. And is it they don't show up because they don't care, or is it they don't show up because of the shame associated with the person that they were in your life?
I think in some ways it's both. There's the external of what's going on in their life, and then the internal of how we process that, because we're told you have a mother and you have a father and they're both going to love you. And when that doesn't happen, at least for me, it made me feel like there's something wrong with me.
Right.
And so regardless of the reason, which I agree with you, there is likely shame that they're holding on to, it doesn't mean it doesn't affect us.
Right.
And I guess I'd be curious what you think of the idea of generational trauma. And you could never know fully, but did he have an experience in his life that mimicked the way that he was acting as well? And
Yeah. Well, and he was adopted, so I don't know a lot
Yeah.
about his childhood, although obviously being adopted, there was something that
Yeah.
happened that disrupted his family
Yeah.
structure. I can tell you that my abuser, my former husband, absolutely had heavy domestic abuse in his household. And unfortunately, statistics show that people who have trauma in their household will have a very much a higher, definitely significantly higher statistics that they will become an abuser or a victim. And it played out in our relationship, in my marriage.
Yeah.
Textbook.
On both sides.
On both sides, absolutely.
When you first met Russell, you saw him across the bar. What was that first interaction like with him?
I was waiting. We were at the Four Seasons in Beverly Hills. I was waiting on a friend to have dinner who was coming in from out of town, and he had a large group. There was about 10 of them, a business dinner, and so they were waiting on a table, and I was waiting on a friend. And actually, one of his other friends approached me and just started talking to me, and then that's how we met. And he was very aloof at first, but also super charming. Abusers have a tendency to be very charismatic and charming, which makes it almost impossible for people from the outside to even fathom that on the inside of the house things are very, very different. So he was extremely charming and very much a knight in shining armor effect. I had, as our relationship grew over the months, I had a textile company in the garment district in LA. We produced baby bedding, and everything was kind of moving to China at that time. And he just said, I don't want you to work. I don't want you in the garment district. It's not safe. I don't want you going to China all the time, so let me just take care of you, and it felt very romantic, and you should have a baby, and you have so much love to give. And I'm thinking, this is the greatest thing ever. And, it was just drawing me in so easily, especially a girl who wanted a father.
Yeah.
And someone saying, I'm here, I'm going to take care of you, I'm going to give you a baby, we're going to be a family. It was everything I thought I'd ever wanted.
Yeah. As you went through that experience, he said to you at one point, I'm bad for you, or I'm going to be bad for you. What did you think when he said that?
Unfortunately, I think that it's what a lot of women think is, you'll be different with me. He did say, you're a really nice girl, and I'm not going to be good for you. But in some odd way, with someone like me who had the self-esteem issues and I guess dad issues, I believed that it would be different with me, because once he sees how much I love him and that I'm so loyal and I'm extremely faithful and honest, then it'll change his perspective on women. And, it's unfortunately a very common thing for people to think that it's just going to be different with me.
Well, and especially as you described, it's not just I'm going to be different, but I am fully taking care of you, and I'm going to take care of everything. It's sort of both at the same time. As you got married and your relationship progressed, did you ever feel anything that made you think twice? Or was there ever a moment that you felt any discomfort just emotionally in the beginning?
I remember we were in Cabo. We got married at the one and only Pamia. And I remember putting on my wedding dress and thinking, this is a huge mistake. But at that point, I was also 5 months pregnant. And so it was a huge mistake, but I felt I gave up my company. Now I'm having a baby, and I didn't feel that I had the strength at the time to say, I'm not going to do this. But I knew throughout my entire wedding that day that it was a mistake.
I can't imagine feeling that way and being pregnant at the same time, to have this gut feeling and hold that back. When you talk about him being charismatic and putting on a show almost for the outside world, when Real Housewives came across your plate, what was that like to start filming and having the duality of what you were experiencing with what was being recorded?
I look back, and it was definitely in my subconscious, but he could be so great, when he was charismatic, and he could be great. And people don't act out in the mall. They act out behind closed doors. And so in some ways, I believe that the camera would make him the good person all the time, because he was definitely a narcissist, and he wanted people to love him. And so having the cameras there, I might get the great side all the time. And I look back, and when I watched season 1 of Beverly Hills, I saw this girl who wasn't me. It was a ghost of myself, a shell of the person that I used to be. And a friend of mine called me, who I'd known for 20 plus years, and he said, I don't know who that girl is on that show, but it's not you. Like, you're one of the funniest people I know. You're always laughing and being so sarcastic, and none of that is there. And that's what happens when you're with someone who's controlling you constantly, is that you laugh too much, you don't laugh enough, you talk too much, you don't talk enough, your hair is too long, your hair is too short, your dress is too long, your dress is too short. Like, there's no winning with an abuser, because it's all about control. So no matter what you do, you can't keep the lid on that pot. And it is a slow burn. So you don't necessarily see it coming until you're so wrapped up in it that you can't remember who you used to be, because you don't want to laugh too much or not enough. and there's no really in between. You should laugh whenever you feel it, you know,
Totally.
and talk when you feel it, and don't talk when you don't feel like it. But you can't do that with an abuser. That's why abuse escalates,
Yep.
because they take the control, and the control becomes greater and greater and greater. I speak about a frog. If you put a frog in a pot of lukewarm water, the frog's happy. It's
Yeah.
swimming around. You turn it up a little bit. Now it's a jacuzzi. The frog's on vacation. You turn it up a little bit more, and the frog is dead because the water's boiling. And that's
Yeah.
how abuse is. It happens. It's a slow burn, and it always escalates. I've been to shelters all over the world. I have visited with women, countless survivors and victims, and no one has ever said to me, all of a sudden it just stopped. Because it doesn't. It escalates. And you don't even see it's coming. You don't even know it's happening until the water's boiling.
Yeah. As you talked about season 1 and sort of not being yourself, there was a unbelievably vulnerable moment at the poker tournament where you shared your story and were raising money for the 1736 Family Crisis Center. And as you were doing that, and as you were supporting these women, you were also experiencing exactly what they were experiencing.
Mm-hmm.
How did you think about that as both things were happening?
I've reflected on that often. When I was doing work for the 1736 Family Crisis Center, and I would spend time at the shelters, there's 5, and there's an awesome organization. I wonder, looking back, if I was getting therapy at the same time as I was watching them get therapy without me having to admit that I actually needed it.
That's really interesting.
Like sitting in on their sessions and being there as a supporter,
Yep.
if I was listening more than I was letting on at the time.
Yeah. And it also was the truth because you did witness abuse as a child. And so there was a very sad and scary facade that you could hide behind and almost have your real feelings about what was happening to you in the present, but everyone was thinking that this is what happened to you in the past.
Right.
And it's just another place where you're hiding your true emotions and they're bubbling up without the outside world truly understanding what you were going through.
Absolutely. And in being with those women, I would sit and question, because some of the stories, and this is one thing that I am critical about with the press, is that they tell these stories that are so horrendous that a lot of women question, and people in general, I don't mean just women, question whether they're actually being abused, because the ones that get huge publicity are people who get shot by their abuser, or it's just so dramatic when it comes out in the media, versus if someone is calling you a slut and a whore and a bitch and a cunt all day, every day, then that is abuse, and they don't have to shoot you in the face for it to become abuse. And it's one thing that when I was with these ladies, I would hear these stories that were so horrendous of the women that were in shelter, and I would think, maybe I'm not being abused because I have a nice car, I have a nanny, I have so much around me. Is it even fair for me to say I'm being abused when these women have suffered so much greater than I? And that's something, when I did Dr. Phil a couple times, we had women on that were abused so severely. People had held them down and tattooed horrible words on their face and just cut their fingers off. It was just so dramatic that I feel like it sends a real mixed message to say, if you think you're being abused, you're being abused.
Yeah.
And you don't need to justify that if it's not a serious Nicole Brown Simpson situation, that you're not being abused. If you even crosses your mind, then you should talk to somebody about it.
And I think what's so important about what you just said is that every single person's story is different. No two stories are the same, and we can't compare one to the other because it's each individual person's lived experience. And it's not that one is worse or better or anything like that. It's just the fact that there is abuse happening in a relationship, regardless of person A, person B, or person C. And I've found myself in my life justifying actions or laughing about them because I grew up skiing. I went to a liberal arts college. I had luxuries that I know many people didn't. And also, there were things that made me feel like I was not lovable, that I was bad, that there was nothing that I could do right. And I just found myself making excuses that, as you just said, you know, whether it was sort of the car or the nanny, it's almost like we trick ourselves into believing that it's not abuse or it's not that bad, but it is. What do you make of sort of that feeling of the justification of, but there's something worse?
One of the things that I went through with having my daughter, I felt like I grew up without a father, and now she has, and I grew up with a single mom who struggled, and so now she has a mother, a father, a nanny, a home in Bel Air, you know, cars, private school. So I can go through this for her to have the life that I always thought I wanted. I can keep everything behind closed doors, hide my reality from her as well, because she had an amazing live-in nanny who, when she would start to see the tension, she would take my daughter away. And I really believe that she didn't know what was happening. And for me, I also struggled so heavily with the concept of doing shared custody with him, because here I have this beautiful little girl and he had such horrible anger management problems. And although he never was abusive toward my daughter, I don't know what that eventuality would look like in her teen years, or if, you know, something would switch in him and he could go crazy in front of her. So for me, staying and going through what I went through to protect her and to keep her with me and to keep her beautiful life of a mother and a father and a house and private school and cars and all the things that I thought made this beautiful life, little did I know that she recognized a lot more that was going on than I had ever dreamt.
I want to talk about that, but I want to go back to something for a second, because what you just described with your daughter and you holding things back and holding it inside almost mimics what you did for your mom, where you took on all of the burden, both from not talking about it with your mom and hiding your daughter from it. Do you think that there's a correlation between the two and how you felt about yourself to take all of that burden on?
I do. I always felt like I was stronger than my mom. And maybe part of that comes from the feeling of rejection of my father. Like, I can do this. I was always a very competitive athlete and, you know, needed to win everything, and probably walled myself off from people to protect myself, but also feeling like, as I said, my mom and I grew up together, and it was more of that kind of a relationship versus a mother. And I still, to this day, am very protective of my mom.
Yeah.
She's just such a sweet soul. And I know everything that she went through to raise me, and then protecting my daughter is just, you know, second nature. But my daughter's tough as nails. She's a tough little cookie. So she's definitely a very, very strong girl. And maybe that's because of her journey and what we lived through.
When you have those conversations with your daughter, what advice would you give to a parent who has been through an abusive relationship that has a child to have those conversations?
Those are really tough conversations. In my situation, because my former husband, my abuser, committed suicide, things were a little different for us. But my Dr. Sophie, my psychiatrist, he was very adamant that I don't stop talking about her father, so that she didn't feel like people just disappear that are in your life. And she was with me when I found him hanging. She was in the car with my assistant. She didn't physically see him, but of course the 911 tapes are everywhere, and I'm screaming and having a complete meltdown. And then I say, like, oh my God, Kennedy's in the car, my daughter, and we have to get her out of here because it was in a cul-de-sac where it happened. And I wanted her to get out before all the emergency vehicles came. And then after that, Dr. Sophie said, just don't stop talking about him. Mention him every once in a while. And we were in the car. She was in her car seat. And we were going to school. And I remember this moment so vividly. And I said, do you miss Daddy? And she said, no. And I said, well, I miss him sometimes. I said, do you remember when we were in Hawaii and we did this? And I was trying to give her some references. And she said, no, N-O. And then everything kind of got quiet. And then she said, Mommy, why would you miss a boy that screamed at you all the time? And thank goodness I was in the front and she was in her car seat in the back, because tears were streaming down my face. And I thought, I can't believe she knew. And I thought that I was keeping this. I thought I was hiding the actual reality that was happening in her house from her. And that Sylvia, her nanny, and I were doing a better job than we did.
Yeah.
But at 5 years old, she said that to me. And I thought, if a 5-year-old could see it, why did it take me so long to walk away?
When you look back at that, I think one of the most difficult things is hearing her say that and you reflecting, as you said, on what took so long. And I think it's so important to talk about the fact that it's everything you said from the beginning, that it is so difficult to leave. And when I look back and think about the resources and the wealth and the power and all of the things that were around you at the time, I think there's such an important lesson that it doesn't matter. It's not easy to go. And you have to have the moment, as you said, where you discover that for yourself, because no one could tell you what to do. You had the moment where you said, enough, I'm not doing this anymore. And when we know better, we do better. And I think that is such, just as you've talked about your journey, just reflecting on what she said to you and how difficult it was to leave. I think it's just, again, it's just such an important message that we can't beat ourselves up for the things that we don't understand yet. As you reflect back, how did you start your healing journey from everything that had gone on in your marriage and dealing with your ex's passing? What did that journey look like to begin to heal?
I spent a lot of time listening to the Eagles and drinking Chardonnay in my backyard. That was the beginning of the healing, I guess, because the paparazzi were insane. Back when we actually, had paparazzi everywhere in LA, they were outside my house all the time. I couldn't go anywhere. I was in shock. Probably a good couple months, and I couldn't go anywhere. I couldn't leave my house, and I had armed security living with me, and so they snuck me up to a friend of mine's house. They put me under a blanket in the back of an Escalade in the garage, and my bodyguard and my assistant drove me up to a friend of mine's house in Beverly Park, and he made dinner for me, and he said, there's nobody else that's going to fix this. He said, you're going to have to put on your big girl pants, or you can F up your life and Kennedy's life forever. So nobody can make these decisions for you. No one's getting you out of this. Like, you're just going to have to do this. As opposed to all my other friends who I so adore, who were just like, you're going to be okay. It's going to be okay. And you think, am I going to be okay?
Yeah.
I have no idea. And I was left with a ton of other problems. There was a corporate lawsuit that my husband was being sued, and it went to me because he never signed the divorce papers. So I had all this financial pressure going on, and financial abuse is huge in control relationships. So he had me sell my company, and now I have a black Amex. I can buy whatever I want, but he's able to track me all day, every day, because you just went to Starbucks, you just went to Beverly Hills Hotel, you were at Chanel. Like, who were you with? Where were you? You know, it's just a constant tracking device.
And you're dependent on him.
Totally dependent. And I have no access to bank accounts because everything, he had all the control. But then he would say, when he's being in an abusive mode, what are you bitching about? Like, you can buy whatever you want, you know, but they don't let you have access to cash because that way you can't, like my friend Adrian used to say, stockpile cash so you can get away. I had no way to stockpile cash.
Yeah.
And so that control, after he committed suicide, I had no access to any of our bank accounts. And I'm sitting in this house with cars and tuition payments that are due, and all I have is a credit card. And he really just left me in such a horrible state. So I was in shock from the suicide, scrambling my brain, trying to figure out how to ever find any of our assets or take care of my child. And so the Chardonnay and the Eagles was the first step. And then my friend saying, you're going to have to put on your big girl pants and do this because nobody's going to do it for you. It was such a harsh reality, but I think that was the moment when I thought, okay, I actually have to put on my big girl pants and walk out there and get this done. Because Kennedy's life is in front of her, and I can't falter at this point and not be the strong person that she needs to see get through this.
Part of that reality check, I would imagine, was around the time when you wrote your book, Hiding from Reality. All of this happened in such a short period of time. When you, as you said, put on your big girl pants and went out to take care of things, I would imagine the book was part of that. What was that like to write the book, both just to write it, but also knowing that it was your livelihood going forward?
Yeah. I wrote the book really quickly. They wanted it, my publishers wanted it to be released in conjunction with the reunion for Housewives. So it was in such a compressed amount of time. I would like to go back and write it from this perspective and also the life after perspective.
Yes.
Because when the book ends, I'm still in financial trouble. You know, things have really fallen apart, but I needed to get it out so quickly. When I finished the book, I remember I was sitting in Vail at La Bodega, which is a restaurant that I love, and I had a midnight deadline Eastern time, and I literally was down to the minute, and I pushed send, and I just started bawling, like the kind where you can't catch your breath, like crying, sobbing in my friend's restaurant. And it wasn't the reaction I expected. I thought I would feel like, okay, you know, it's done, it's out there, I made it on time. But instead, I was just a complete wreck, thinking I just told everything about my entire life to the world. And it was scary, not knowing how people were going to react or whether they were going to believe me, because there was a lot of that too, where people think that behind the Golden Gates in Beverly Hills, people don't get abused. And there was a lot of that early on. And I know now people are much more educated and recognize that it crosses all socioeconomic lines and race, religion, everything. But then it was very much controversial, that it was hard to believe because the person I looked like on TV didn't seem like someone who was being abused. Because, you know, and so it was very cathartic, but also very hard to realize that I was opening my entire life up to criticism even more.
I had such a strong reaction to you saying that people didn't believe it, because going back and watching some of the episodes, there was so much there that wasn't said, but was said. And obviously hindsight is 20/20, but as I watched it when it came out in season 1, I hadn't gone on my own healing journey. I didn't understand, although different, some of the similarities of what you were experiencing. And there's this moment where you're watching Kyle and Mauricio dance, and you can see the sadness in your face. And it was just after a conversation with Kyle, and you notice that the camera's on you, and you go stoic. And I could empathize so much with that moment, because there were so many times that something would be said or something would be done, and I couldn't have the emotion I wanted to, and I didn't even have a camera on me, but just the people around me. And I felt for you so much in that moment that it is hard for me to believe that anyone could watch those seasons and not see it. I mean, talking about your little company, or, you know, the turnout of the poker tournament, everything you've described today was on display. If you could go back now, looking back after your healing journey, what would be the story you want to tell today?
I do a lot of public speaking, and I continue to tell my story, even though it's still hard at times. I typically cry every time I speak, but it's mainly when I talk about my daughter and just the fact that I wish I would have found the strength to leave earlier. But the journey now for me is telling people there's life after, and to find that courage, because if you do leave, there is a life in front of you. And I think that's the biggest scary part for all of us, is thinking, if I make this decision, is my future going to be brighter? And I can say that if you're in an abusive relationship, your future is going to be brighter, because you're going to learn. And the next time, you're not going to let someone treat you the way the person is treating you now. And you can't see it until you're away from it. When I tell my story, when I speak, I envision it as someone else's life now, because I can't fathom that I actually lived through that or allowed that to happen in my life. So I asked Dr. Sophie, my psychiatrist, I said, when I'm speaking and I feel like I'm telling someone else's story, is that because I've compartmentalized this? Is this an unhealthy thing? And he said, no, I think it's because you've moved past it and you really have done the work to say, I would never let someone do that to me again. And I can't believe I let it happen the first time around.
Yeah.
But just drawing that strength that you didn't know you have to get through something like that and to come out the other side, life after is the mission, and life after is the journey, and life after is the messaging.
I love that life after messaging, because it is scary. You're literally taking a leap. And in your case, you didn't understand what your financials were going to look like. You didn't know what the relationship between your ex and your daughter would look like. There were so many unknowns. When you think about that life after, there's also starting over in new, healthier relationships. How did you approach dating again?
I felt in that time of my life that I would never, ever trust another man as long as I lived, and maybe even not another person, because of all the things that came out after the suicide. There was so much that I didn't even know was going on because I didn't have access to the financials. And but my friend whose home I went to that made me dinner and told me to put on my big girl pants, George.
We love them.
George,
We love
yes,
George.
We love George. He said, I'm going to make one phone call for you. And he called John, who's now my husband, and I was dealing with corporate litigation and also personal litigation to try to find the assets to take care of our family. And John had worked on Wall Street. He was with the SEC, so he's dealt with tons of public companies. And George said, you have to help Taylor. You've met her before socially, and you just have to help her. Like, she's in such a mess. And so John came into my life, and we fought for probably the first 2 years we knew each other. Because every time he'd call me, it was bad news. You know, it was another $100,000 bill from the law firm. And then this law firm just found that this account's empty. And I'm just like, every single time the phone would ring, I'd just drink my Chardonnay and listen to the Eagles and get bad news every single day. And he would call George and say, I can't deal with this girl. Like, this isn't getting anywhere. She's like so upset all the time. And so he and I worked together for about 2 years, and then we ended up getting married and having a relationship, but we really did hate each other. But I think if he wouldn't have been by my side through the worst times of my life, I don't know that I would have ever trusted anyone to date again. And also, my life is a book, and also it was all over the tabloids at the time, and I never I just, in my wildest dreams, thought, how am I ever going to meet someone who doesn't know every single thing about me? Like,
Yeah.
what's the first conversation going to be when we go out to dinner? Like,
Yeah.
oh, where'd you grow up? Oh, I already know. When's your birthday? I already know.
He also
Do
knew
you
the
have
stuff
kids? I
that
already know.
happened off camera, the stuff that wasn't even aired because
Exactly.
you were going through it all with him.
Yeah, so he knew everything about me, and I thought, if I'm still lovable after all of this, then I guess it's good, right? And then when he asked me to marry him, I said, I'll marry you, but you cannot change me, because it's taken me at least this long to try to figure out who the girl was before I became the ghost of myself. And now that I'm getting back to that person, I like to sleep late. I stay up late. You know, I'm a Gemini. There's 8 of me. I don't have a plan. You know, so you're gonna have to love all 8 of me. Please don't try to change me, because I'm just trying to figure me out again.
Yeah. What was it like as you're figuring yourself out to go back into the spotlight on Ultimate Girls Trip and Orange County?
So I would say the greatest gift after everything happened is I moved to Vail, Colorado. And I took Kennedy. As I mentioned to you, the paparazzi situation was absurd. We couldn't go anywhere. And they were, you know, they used to be pretty aggressive back in the day. And so they would say, I'd be walking down the street with her and be like, how does Kennedy feel about the suicide? And be like, you guys, come on now. I mean, I get it. Like, you can yell things at me, but she's 5 years old, 6 years old.
And she's here.
And she's right here. Like, we don't need to be doing this to her. And it was just, they'd be all around our cars. It was just crazy. And so I moved to Vail. And I had severe post-traumatic stress disorder, and was trying to not take meds. And so I would just get up on the mountain and look out over the Rocky Mountains and think, okay, I'm really small in this universe, in this world. And I would just ski. I skied like 110 days, and just anytime I'd start to feel my anxiety ramping up, I would just go get on the mountain. And it was the most cathartic time in my life, just to ski and write and just be alone with that massive mountain.
I'm smiling because skiing is so therapeutic for me. I grew up skiing. I love being on the mountain. And there is nothing like being on 10,000 feet above sea level on a blue sky day with sun.
Absolutely.
And I would even say by myself, I can point to one of the best ski days I ever had. And it was me by myself making all of my own decisions, having full autonomy in just that beautiful healing weather. And it literally gives you space to think.
Absolutely.
That is, I didn't mean to interrupt, but I related so much to that because it's so freeing to be in nature. And as you were talking about it, I could feel the warmth come off of you thinking about those days that you were out there skiing. Before I interrupted you, when you were thinking about skiing and out there saying, look how big the world is, when did you start to change the belief about yourself and build that strong self that you were prior? Bring that Taylor back.
I don't know if I still to this day have times when I have a lot of self-doubt, and especially just taking new risks and thinking, is there a potential that I'm going to fail at this? Can I handle another failure? Which is a very self-limiting belief that I'm working on. Fear of failure. You know, I don't want to have another crash and burn in my life. I don't feel like, but I know now because of what I've been through that I have the strength inside of me that I never knew I had. And then if I'm put in another situation that is, God forbid, tragic or something, that I can draw from that strength and know that I've been through so much in my life that I can survive anything. And that's a really empowering feeling for me, having come from a place of low self-esteem and just thinking, you know, you can kind of just bring it because I can handle it. What are you going to do to me now? There's nothing that hasn't been said about me. You know, in the tabloids, I've had the most horrible things said to me on social media, you know, over all the years. So it almost makes you impenetrable when you come back from something so insane.
Well, it's showing you the strength that you have inside of you, and also doing the healing and building the tools that when you are in those moments of self-doubt, that you have the tools to bring yourself back to reality, and know that that limiting belief oftentimes is projected onto you and not something that you truly feel, but it's a way that someone else made you feel.
Yeah, I think that fear of failure and those limiting beliefs come also from not having the support system that, as we talked about earlier, like the mother, father that should have been there for you. So then do you just doubt everyone? Because if half of my genetics
Yeah.
can't stand up and show up for me, which unfortunately is so common, you know, kids that only have one parent or one parent that's not supporting them, it lingers in the back of your mind thinking, if I can't impress this person who's half of me, then how am I going to impress anyone else when you're going forward with fear of failure feelings?
Yeah. When you think about your journey as a whole, and you think about your introduction into the world on a national platform, what do you want people to know about you that they may not know?
I feel like I'm so out there that I talk about everything that I feel. More than anything is just I'm overly probably compassionate to a fault, that I just feel everyone's emotions. And it's something that I love about my personality, but also it's a lot because I take other people's emotions with me.
Yeah.
And I can let that have an effect on me. After everything happened, I would get tons of letters and tweets and about people who were going through domestic violence, and they would write me and say, I live in Australia, I have 2 kids, I'm in a domestic violence situation, can you help me? And I would just be all day, every day. And my psychiatrist said, you have to limit your exposure to this, because I just was feeling everyone's pain, and I found myself really getting depressed over taking that on.
Well, you have to help yourself first.
Right. And just trying to figure out how to be there for others without completely absorbing everything that's going on in their own life. I don't know if I don't know if it's a flaw, because I think caring for others is so important, but at the same time being able to help people without taking it with me.
100%. And what you've done with The Naked Truth and Empowered Experts and your public speaking, tell me a little bit more about that for you. You're doing a microcosm in terms of the depth that you're going into, because you're sharing your story. You're not taking in all of the tweets and the letters and the emails necessarily. What gives you the strength to tell your story over and over and share so much on The Naked Truth?
Yeah. I believe that because my life was spared, murder-suicide is common when there's domestic violence involved. When one person decides to take their life, statistically, there were pretty high odds that he would have taken mine as well. And because my life was spared, I feel like I was left here to share the message and to talk about life after, and to talk about you can find the courage within. And there's a huge support system out there waiting for you, as far as social services and family law. They're all available. And so telling that story is not only my mission, but also my fate.
Yeah. You do it so eloquently, and there's such a passion behind what you do. And I think when you talk about it being your fate and feeling like it was what you were meant to do to help other people, there's such a tie for me in terms of why I started this podcast, and why I think the journey of healing and going to therapy and understanding yourself better and healing those childhood wounds is so important, because oftentimes we don't talk about the difficult stuff. We don't talk about the scary stuff. We hold shame around it, and we feel like it's too much, or people tell us it's too much. And when I was going through what I went through, I wish that there were more resources. I wish that there were more honest stories about what happened because to other people, and that sharing, because I think that's what connects us. As you look back at your journey, what do you want to leave people with today if you were to leave them with a message?
Hope. I would like for them to know that there's love all around you just waiting to be received. You just have to step out of the darkness to see how much light is surrounding you and how much people will rally around you. It's so difficult. The roller coaster is so hard for friends and family to understand the cycle of abuse. And one day you're leaving and it's over and this is done. And the next day you're holding hands at a charity event and your friends are confused and shaking their heads because they were on the phone with you until 3 o'clock in the morning when you were crying and you're leaving and this is over. And then the next thing you know, everything is like kisses and roses, or it appears to be.
Yeah.
And then people start falling off. People stop listening to you and they stop supporting you and they stop coming to events with you because they can't understand the whole roller coaster. So knowing that once you take that step, there's going to be a whole bunch of cheerleaders around you that are going to get you to the next level. It's just finding the courage to actually walk out the door.
Yeah. Just the way that you painted that picture of more support leaving than staying is so powerful, because as the world gets smaller and smaller and you get more isolated, the feeling of hopelessness becomes stronger and stronger. And I am so thankful that you found the strength to leave, because what you are doing to support people and share your story, I can't even imagine how many lives you've touched with your story and helping others.
Well, and
So
yours
thank
as
you.
well. Thank you.
Thank you. So I like to ask this question as a general question. What is something that someone has told you that you'll never forget?
When we go back to the thought about financial control and my having this quote unquote glamorous life that I didn't have as a child, and feeling like that was important enough for me to stay for my daughter and for myself with, you know, you have nannies, you have this, you have that, is that one of my mentors said to me a long time prior to meeting my husband, I should have listened, is money doesn't buy happiness, it buys convenience. And the convenience and the security that it provides was a facade for me, and that resonates with me a lot. Thinking, for me, convenience means if my mother, God forbid, was ill and needed a treatment in Sweden, that I could charter a private jet and take her there immediately and get her the best health care ever, you know, and that's, to me, is convenience. It's not being able to buy a Chanel bag. It really has changed my perspective in going through the financial control that I lived through, is that you can have all the money in the world, but you can also be being abused and being unhappy, and so many different levels of misery that surround that. And having that as security and convenience is really what it's about.
I think the perspective of it's not about the want, it's about what do you actually need,
Right.
and what is going to make your life better, healthier, and happier.
100%. When I was young, you know, as we've talked about growing up with my mom not having means, I used to pull black and white fashion ads out of Vogue and every other magazine I could find and stapled them all over my wall. And I thought, if I can wear Gucci, if I can wear Louis Vuitton, if I can wear, as I'm just staring at my wall day after day, thinking, I'm going to be so happy.
Yeah.
And then I'm in Beverly Hills on The Real Housewives, and I've worn pretty much every designer you can think of. And I was the most sad time of my entire life, that I'm with this abusive person who's disrespecting me every day, and I'm allowing it to happen. So the clothes never made a difference. I actually think that I have disdain toward that whole thought process
Yeah.
now, just because I surrounded myself with so many material objects thinking it was going to make all the difference. And it was really the worst time of my life.
When you went back and did Orange County and Ultimate Girls Trip, what were you hoping that people, well, why did you decide to come back is actually a much better question.
Well, when Andy and I talked about it, it was so cute. We were on the phone, and he said, "No, this is just like a girls' trip, like no drama, it's just you guys are
7
gonna
days,
have
8
fun."
housewives in a house.
Right? And I'm like, Andy Cohen, you are funny. Okay, you actually think I believe that we're supposed to just go and have fun the whole time? So, I wanted to go back on because I'm in such a different place, and I hated how the book ended. Just my life was in shambles. It had to go on. The reunion, I was a wreck. And I felt like for the viewers too, for myself, absolutely, but also just for the viewers to go, oh, good, she's okay. Because we don't know what happened. I just disappeared. And it gave me an opportunity to go on Ultimate Girls Trip. We had a blast. And Brandy and I got to resolve some long-term issues finally. And bonded with Eva, of course, and Phaedra, and I knew a lot of those girls prior, but not Eva and not Dorinda. So it was fun to get to know them. But we had a blast on that trip, and it is the reason that I thought, I think I could do this again because I'm a different person. I didn't get to enjoy the ride. And you mentioned earlier when I was watching Kyle and Mauricio dancing, and you could see probably the look on my face of, wait, this is what relationships are supposed to look like. When I started watching season 1, I was watching other people's relationships and realizing how different they looked when you would see them versus even Russell and myself. It was very obvious. And you and I talked about separately that I went on Wendy Williams in season 1, and she said, he abuses you, doesn't he? Right there on air. And I just thought, of course, I'm not going to say yes because my life was in danger. But it was so evident even for me watching, going, wait, their marriages look totally different than mine. So maybe this isn't just in my head.
I love that you came back and showed the full Taylor, because we saw glimpses of it, and it was so refreshing to see someone go through the healing journey and come back on showing that growth. With our final moments, I want to turn the tables and let you ask me any question that you'd like.
I'm curious as to what made you go on a healing journey after 10 years of not.
I think that I had been in therapy. I'd been in therapy for almost 15 years. And I would say that the first 6 was me going in, unloading everything, leaving, and then going back in a few days and doing it over again. And I wasn't actually solving a problem.
Right.
I found a therapist that pushed me so hard in the first session, my jaw was on the floor, and I was like, I am coming back. When can we book our next session? And how do I break up with my therapist?
I love this.
So that started the journey. I then did group therapy, which was a totally different experience. And I, in group therapy, was playing out a lot of transference of what it was like to grow up in my household. And through that, I had many moments where I wanted to give up. And in therapy, many moments where I just said, I'll never be in a relationship again. Can we just start focusing my therapy on how I can live a happy life without ever having a relationship? And having been in several unhealthy relationships or situationships or whatever they were, there was a moment where on my birthday, I was on the floor of my shower hysterically crying and said, I will never get back to this place. And that's the moment that things actually started changing. They were gradually changing with my therapist, but that was the moment where I said, I will never get back to this place. And about a year and a half ago, I just couldn't hold on to the person I was trying to pretend to be. And I had to go inward and look to myself to find who I was. And it was through somatic breathing therapy. It was through acupuncture. I bought crystals. Like, I was a salesperson. I had no personality. Well, I had a personality in sales, but I had no person behind the sales. I just was all business at work. And that was the only place I felt like I was even a glimpse of myself. And I wanted to completely change that and be a human being that also does something for work. And so that moment when I was on the floor was the moment that I said, I can't do this. And it still took me 1.5 years to truly understand what a healing journey would look like.
Well, you're here now.
I am. Thank you. You got me to cry in 30 seconds.
I cry every day. It's good.
Taylor, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much for letting me share my story.
It's unbelievably inspiring, and I wish you nothing but the best.
You too, darling.
Thank you.
Yes. Thank you for having me.